Hi, my name's Matt Hewitson, and this is an adaptation of a breakfast workshop that I used to run a few years ago, and when I was mainly consulting to SME leaders and business owners. Uh, Given our economic climate at the moment, as well as the growth in expansive technology, I thought it was probably useful to share, and at least if people are starting to sort of embark on their journey to innovate or pivot, as obviously as the world has changed recently, I thought this might be a useful start, and certainly also a resource for people that potentially working with technology teams or working with other components of the business around innovation to at least get a bit of an understanding for what they're doing and some of the language, and I guess also the processes that they do use, because obviously so whether it's around innovation or sort of tech development, it is a different sort of operating model, and one that is a little bit different to what is sort of normal, sort of traditional sort of corporate practice. But essentially, this workshop was a starting piece with my clients to basically start to change their business. We are obviously innovating at a time of great change at the moment. And as a HR person, one would expect that you are at the forefront, and ultimately with the way that sort of social distancing is in place, and with borders locked down, the organisational structure and operating model needs to become more agile and responsive to customers. As I said, the workshop is designed to sort of start your journey and start your thinking, but fundamentally the way to sort of start being start this at least this thought process is to to position yourself around customers. And I guess what that means is that it's very good to obviously have an idea and a potential sort of opportunity or sort of route to start chasing, but the way that you need to be looking at things now is it's a lot about personalization, and it's a lot about understanding your customer better than what they understand or know themselves. And you only really get that through gaining sort of deep customer insights and understanding their behaviors, how they make decisions, and also what are the other sort of whether it's to be burdens on their time that potentially they are looking to solve. In a lot of cases, people don't know that they have a problem, or it's a problem sort of worth solving until a solution is presented to them. So I guess sort of corporately, your innovation program could be based around the creation and development of new products. It could be a new feature, or it could be a completely different product or service line altogether. But fundamentally, even though you may be in HR, it is still essential that you are working closely with the people within your business that are perhaps facing the customer or interacting with the customer. And you very much need to have that information and that data and just understand what that customer experience is. And it's the only way to do that is to actually go and sort of seek out that information. So things that you can sort of start to do initially is collect sort of intel. It might be from your sales team or from your marketing team, or even from the accounts receivable, just in terms of how potentially they're dealing with customers and the feedback that they're receiving. What will most likely need to happen is that you'll need to train those people that are on the front line to both identify problems, or potential problems I should say, and certainly ensure that information is captured. So example that I use often is that for a long time, sort of TV stations were, sort of all conquering and all powerful, and obviously as a result, sort of advertising revenues were what sustained them and kept them in the lifestyle that they were accustomed to. But little did they know that at some point that their biggest threat and biggest competitor would be something like Facebook or the mobile phone, where people previously would have to be forced to sit through the adverts while they're watching their show, but now obviously people are looking away and sort of certainly focused on their phone through the adverts, and more often than not they're probably more focused on the on the phone throughout the show as well. So engagement needs to increase as well, even while the product is being used. Innovation, as I sort of talked about so far, is very much around customers. It's about solving a problem, and quite often, it's one that no one has realised that exists yet. The expression which is thrown around quite a bit is that if Henry Ford had asked his customers what it was that they needed, those customers would have most likely asked for a faster horse as opposed to a car. So more often than not, that's where the best sort of new innovations come from. These sort of four sort of kinds of innovation, which are reasonably common, they're well known, and certainly have had an impact on most of us. And I think what I wanted to do was just sort of talk about, each of these products in isolation, but then also, I guess, collectively what they've done. Ultimately, what they've been about is, the experience of the end user. So we've got the pod coffee machine at the top there. Obviously, the idea around that, or the innovation, I should say, is around bringing sort of fresh quality sort of cafe. I'll argue, and maybe put that in inverted commas, the cafe quality coffee there. But ultimately what it does is it enables people to have fresh coffee in the home without the mess of a larger espresso machine. There's a number of other innovations that sort of go along and support that product as well. And the fact that you can go into a store, you can buy and you can try sort of new flavors of coffee pods, and it certainly means that you can space out the beans. Also, there's a customer experience that goes with obviously one being able to go into the store and try new flavors of coffee, but also the ability to order those pods online as well. The iPhone there. As we all know, the iPhone has now replaced our digital camera. It's replaced our computer in a lot of ways. We do all of our sort of desktop research. It holds all our photos. It's our calendar. It's our fitness and health tracker. Again, the examples that have been used before is that we would have had to carry all these devices separately before. Now we've got the whole raft of sort of different solutions, essentially in our fingertips and in our pocket. Again, the focus here is on that customer experience and the ease of use and access to those solutions. Obviously, Uber, I won't go into Uber too much, but obviously it's the customer experience of Uber as opposed to the traditional taxis, the ability to book, the ability to pay, and the ability to review your experience with the driver, has completely disrupted the taxi industry, and also the Dollar Shave Club as well, which as a male I'll bring up. Obviously shaving is a chore that most of us don't enjoy, and we certainly don't enjoy having to pay too much for the privilege. So Dollar Shave Club essentially is a subscription service which delivers 4 raises to you each month, and it's just sort of devoid of all the marketing stuff that the larger companies will obviously put on, and obviously there's a cost benefit with that as well. But obviously, as you probably be able to see from the video, I am certainly not using any razor at the moment. So I guess to give you a bit of a summary of the method for sort of starting innovation, and I'll go through these page by page, but sort of quite quickly, it's around insight. That is knowing your customers or knowing your target market. It's actually identifying a problem. It's then building a solution to obviously solve that problem, and it's having a sustainable business model that obviously is commercial and is something that is able to create that solution in a cost-effective way, and it's also the ability to scale that business model further. So without each of those elements, you would certainly rather them in that order, but without those key elements, it is going to be difficult to innovate effectively. Insight is something that we probably take for granted. I think in a lot of cases people will think that they know their customer, but ultimately, probably don't take as a greater appreciation as probably what they could do. There are a number of ways in which you can sort of employ and I guess sort of develop greater insight with your customers, and one of those is to employ design thinking processes. Essentially, design thinking is a way to get business people to think like designers, and designers to think like business people. But ultimately, it's around putting the customer at the center of your design process. Whereas obviously traditionally, business has been designed and developed strictly from a efficiency perspective. It's important to sort of start as broad as possible and then go narrow, rather than the other way. So what this means is, the more ideas that you have, the better. Also, don't just stop at the first solution. There's potentially lots of different solutions. And I guess, a bad habit is to, be solving a problem and, or trying to solve a problem and just basically stopping at the first sign of success. Importantly, customer observations, are critical. So at the time, I did a lot of work with, with businesses that were wanting to understand who their customers were and also how it was customers were making decisions as well. So I at the time was doing this with them in a retail and a hospitality environment. So the elements were looking around, how they engage, how customers or potential customers engaged with, with the store, what was either sort of creating a path or, creating obstacles for people to look at products or try products or speak to staff, internally within the store. So, it's not a bad practice to actually, basically either set up a team or engage others to, just to observe or to listen in on, engagements with customers as well. I've included a picture there of the McDonald's Create Your Taste campaign. Obviously, it is a few years ago now that it was launched, but I think it's still relevant. And at the time, McDonald's introduced effectively the self-service and the kiosk in the front of the restaurants, whereby people could sort of choose and effectively create their own burgers. So obviously there still is a health movement which exists around healthier eating and giving customers some control around their food and what they put in place. So this is certainly a testing mechanism also for McDonald's to understand their customer behaviour as well, and a great way for them to capture data as well as freeing up I guess staff in the behind the counter in the kitchen as well, to reduce some of the potential issues or the mistakes that are made in taking people's orders as well. So there's a number of different things there. It's all very well for a customer to have a problem, but what you need to know is, well, just how big a problem is it? I'll always sort of talk about, and doctors do the same thing, and rather than with pain specifically, pain is a subjective thing. Doctors will ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful is your broken leg, or is your headache. The same can be done with understanding customer problems. How big a problem is it? Is it a 10? If it really is a 10 and you drill into it, then maybe you're onto something. If that problem is only a 2 and it'd be nice to fix it, but ultimately it's not that big a deal, then probably keep looking, is what I would suggest, and certainly don't focus on that as a problem for much longer. These are I guess some of the critical things that you need to do, but ultimately I guess around understanding those customer problems, you need to understand, well, what are the social implications of creating that solution, in the context of McDonald's again. It's what are the functional needs or the functional challenges, and potentially for them that was an internal one as opposed to an external one, but ultimately no customer likes to it's in their burger and they've asked for no pickles to have a burger full of pickles. So obviously that adds to the customer experience. Obviously there's emotional sort of requirements in solving problems as well, and certainly taking away a problem has a potential knock on to others as well. So another analogy has always been around and I guess it's more of a marketing one, but you don't sell a drill bit, you sell the hole. I guess an extension of that is, well, actually it's not the hole that you're selling, it's the fact that the customer is able to be handy, has been able to put a picture up on the wall and look clever in front of their friends and family because they're an office worker with soft hands, and they've been perfectly capable of drilling a hole in the wall and putting up the picture or the mirror on the wall. So that's really what you're trying to solve. Again, sort of coming back on to problem, a lot of companies will start in reverse and effectively the wrong way. So they'll have a solution, they'll have created something before they've actually found a problem or established that the problem themselves is something that is worth creating a solution for. So look, there's a number of things that you need to do to understand that. So there's painstorming, and that is really mapping out the journey that customers go through, and that's certainly still something that I go through when working with clients around restructuring and also either designing or redesigning I guess either employee or sort of internal experience. The strategy canvas is is a tool that was created by a couple of professors out of INSEAD, and essentially what they're looking for is blue oceans and new areas of strategic opportunity, and also you might have identified a problem. You might have a potential solution, but you still need to experiment with it to make sure that it works, it solves the problem, and ultimately, again, it's something that people are prepared to pay money for. So I think, at the time, sort of a few years ago, I was doing some work with some accounting firms in particular that had offices, all around the country, all around the world, and they were basically just offering solutions, and rather than actually going and looking for problems. And obviously, this is a different mindset for a lot of people in that sort of service industry. Again, similar to the hole in the wall example is, you can purchase an iron and an ironing board to help remove wrinkles from your clothes, but it's not really an iron or an ironing board that you want. You want to look, potentially you want clothes that don't wrinkle. So rather than just thinking, right, well, okay, well, we want to create an iron, we want to create clothes that don't wrinkle. So, there is the opportunity to take that a step further. I've always liked to talk about the innovation that occurred in aviation. It was quite a while ago now, and obviously Southwest Airlines in the US was one of those in particular. But I think by now, most of us, if not all of us, will have flown on some sort of low-cost airline. And I guess how the strategy canvas in particular is a really good example of this is creating this as a business model. So with a low-cost airline, they're very much focused on sort of leisure or so holiday makers, as opposed to business travelers. So for a business traveler, the most important thing is primarily about the travel itself, because it's they need to be comfortable, they need to be able to work through the flight, they need to have proper food, they need to be able to roll off the plane at the end of the flight and be ready to go to work. They don't have the luxury of sort of landing on the other side and then being able to lay by the pool for 3 days. I guess the reverse is with obviously leisure travelers, is that the flight's not the most important thing about their trip. It's the actual holiday destination which is the most important thing. So therefore, customers value business customers value something very different to leisure customers. And for a long time, there was only one sort of solution available to people that needed to travel by plane. So I think, when you actually sort of start to pull that apart, you can see all the different things that, that I guess are included or not included within a low-cost airline that, at the end of the day, they don't really add, too much value or too much significance to the flight itself. So therefore, there's no point in having them and providing them, and obviously then, there's no charge for them either. In terms of the solution, the expression that so I sort of have always sort of referred to as, it's important to ensure that you avoid premature development. So again, it's around building something that people care about, but also starting small. Don't build or don't invest too much money too quickly. At this stage, you're still at this early stage, you're still experimenting, you're still wanting to define the problem and, potentially sort of test different solutions as well. So, what you're trying to do is you're trying to, create engagement, you're trying to create sort of traction, and ultimately to prove your hypothesis. So I guess I always talk about sort of donuts and so the creation or the invention of donuts. The donut on the left there, which is just the plain old cinnamon donut, is essentially deep fried flour, oil, and sugar. However, that was created in the first instance, I don't know, but that would certainly have been the MVP or the minimal viable product. It's only once it was established that people like donuts, people would people would eat them, people would buy them. It was only at that point then people started to iterate the donut as a product by covering in chocolate, covering in sprinkles, creating different flavors, injecting it with jam or custard or whatnot. So, you know, your approach to product or sort of service development needs to be the same. Don't expect to create that the chocolate covered sprinkle donut, you know, from the outset. If you spend all your time trying to do that, potentially you'll have built a product that no one will buy. And I guess, you know, that sort of from a HR perspective, obviously, you know, you are caught in that trap of, you know, obviously needing to be right or wanting to be right. And, you know, as, you know, effectively you are just trying to seek perfection. But, you know, from an innovation sort of standpoint, you know, it's a mistake to do that because, you know, potentially situations change or, you know, as I said, you know, you'll invest in a product or solution which, you know, actually doesn't really solve the problem that you're trying to. I mentioned, you know, before around, you know, potentially having a number of different solutions that you want to be able to test to identify a solution. I guess a great example of that is sort of early days of the, you know, the rechargeable battery. At the time, you know, lithium, you know, was considered to be quite dangerous, and as you know, as it explodes on sort of contact with, you know, with water. So, in the competitive race that ensued, Sanyo and Panasonic, in particular, focused solely on lower energy density and nickel-based rechargeable batteries. Sony, on the other hand, they decided to develop a number of different batteries, and I think it was 6. And each of those 6 batteries was run through the process or the testing process that we've been talking about now. And effectively, each of those 6 batteries was, you know, was competing to be, you know, the final product. And obviously, they would go through all the same tests. They would be testing to see whether they exploded, how effective they were, how well they retained energy, how long they lasted, and ultimately at the end of that trial process, there was a you know, the right combination of lithium-based materials was found, so that you know, they then created what is now sort of a world standard lithium-ion battery. I guess also an example sort of closer to home, as well as, you know, sort of reality TV shows like The Voice or The X Factor or Australian Idol. You know, and so while they're you know, a talent show, effectively, you know, all the contestants, you know, act as prototypes, and those prototypes are tested each week, you know, in slightly different circumstances, you know, with the customers. The customers are engaged. They vote on, you know, essentially on who returns next week. So at the end of the process, you know, at the end of the 10 weeks or the 12 weeks, the producers of the show, and I guess, you know, the record labels, you know, are pretty confident at that point as to who's the most popular and who is going to sell the most albums. So you know, it is, you know, it is a process, and you know, it is a process that you have to be patient with, but it certainly, you know, ensures that you don't spend too much time or money going down the wrong path. Again, and I talk about sort of avoiding premature development. I think, you know, the same goes with the, you know, creating a business model. You know, what you can do is create a lean canvas, and you know, I can include a link on that in the attachments. But you know, essentially, what you want to be able to do is, you know, have a very basic business model here, which enables you to stay lean and agile and also flexible. And also, you know, it needs to be acknowledged that, you know, you can't just insert a new product or service into an existing business model. Many sort of big companies are designed for execution and efficiency, not for searching for new opportunities. So trying to force a disruptive innovation into the existing business model will, you know, create issues and, you know, a lot of challenges that, you know, you don't really have time to worry about. Look, I think it's you know, it's important to try and make room for a new business model, potentially by creating a new business unit or you know, creating an incubator of sorts, just to be able to test you know, some of these new ideas. But then also, if you're doing that with an internal team, it might be that, you hive off a smaller division to test first, or a smaller group of customers to test, rather than testing, across, it's common, it sounds common sense, but typically I find that there's nothing more uncommon than common sense. So you always want to roll out something new or something experimental to a smaller group of people. I guess we've got some real examples there of organisations that haven't been able to adopt new innovations and new technology. Incidentally, both Netflix and Blockbuster at one point in time were both struggling to I guess meet the demands or the challenges around I guess how consumers were consuming video and movies, and if you don't remember, Netflix effectively was at one point in time a mail order sort of video service, but they were certainly struggling for business at that time, and obviously in switching to streaming, whereas sort of Blockbuster remained focused on bricks and mortar. It's you don't have to look far now to see what the risk of doing nothing is at all. So you're better off doing something. Ultimately, I guess what I talk about is you're better off disrupting yourself than allowing somebody else to disrupt you and pull the rug out from underneath your business. So whether it's sort of creating a small group or a lab or an incubator to test and design, it certainly needs to be done, I guess, in consultation with the rest of the business, and obviously for them to be on board. But having that isolation will certainly pay dividends. Once you've found a problem worth solving, you've created a solution that customers will buy. You've developed a business model, and now it sort of comes to the point of scaling it, and I guess sort of scaling that business model. The important thing is to not stop here. So with any new product, it's important to understand the adoption process that goes with it. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with the concept of early adopters and laggards in particular. So obviously early adopters are the people that will stand out the front of the Apple store, lining up to buy the new iPhone or the new iPad or whatnot. Obviously the laggards are the grandparents in particular that are still using the Nokia 6110 flip phone, and don't trust the new technology. So the early adopters are going to be more prepared to they'll be more accepting of potential issues with the early products, but for them it's about having something new, and them being the first. So in continuing to talk to customers, it's about continuing to get their feedback. It's continuing to understand their experience and how they're engaging with a new product. CommBank, in particular, what they did in the early sort of days a few years ago was that they created a customer innovation centre in Sydney, and they had these solutions in place, and obviously a lot of that would have been to do with, or it was to do with, sort of online banking and online banking products at the time, and they actually enabled customers to be able to use and trial a lot of these products in real time. So again, the people within that were able to observe and watch how people sort of interacted and how they used it, and obviously gain very sort of valuable data from it. I think it's it's important to understand as well, just potentially how long it might take for sort of widespread adoption. So if you are creating a new product, you need to be sort of wary as to, is there anything else that needs to occur in order for that innovation, whether it's a new product or new service, to be successful? Does there need to be a broader ecosystem required for it to be successful? So I guess an easy example of that is the electric car. So in order for the electric car to be mainstream, you need the supporting infrastructure to go with that. Unless there's a sort of the batteries themselves will last long enough, as long as there's enough sort of recharging stations for people to charge their vehicle if they're going for a long drive, for instance. Those are all the sorts of things that essentially need to catch up, in order to really and truly scale, your business, if your business is manufacturing electric cars. I think it's important also to look at sort of different types of management as well when we are at this stage. So there's certainly a massive difference between entrepreneurial and traditional management. Certainly important to look at metrics. In an entrepreneurial or a startup situation, you're looking at sort of customer acquisition cost, you're looking at customer retention, you're looking at their churn, you're looking at the lifetime value that customers are bringing to you, referrals, activations from trial to or conversion to a full customer. Say on a free product. Whereas obviously traditional metrics are very much, as I sort of mentioned a few times, around delivery and efficiency. But they are not, designed for innovation. It's just purely around, sort of execution. The communication that sort of supports that as well needs to change. There's obviously a lot more moving parts in an agile sort of development environment. So there's quite a few new tools out there that have been used, but a few older ones as well, like obviously like Slack and Yammer, and obviously Zoom, in particular for a remote operating team, is going through the roof at the moment as well. So we shouldn't forget about leadership as well when it comes to sort of innovation and experimentation. I like to sort of refer to the need for sort of leaders to become the chief experimenters, not the chief decision makers. And ultimately it's the customers that make the decisions. But it's the leader within these organisations that they need to be looking for data and evidence, but in a lot of cases it's their superiority or their positional leadership has no bearing over whether something is a valuable solution or something that people are going to buy. So that is obviously something that needs to occur. It comes back to the data, and I guess that leader needs to be pushing the focus on that data, and ensuring that people are looking through that lens at all times, because obviously when you are innovating, there is a lot at stake. There is a lot of money that can potentially be spent and potentially wasted if the data is ignored or is not captured. But I guess the innovation in the tech space has got I guess a bit of reputation for obviously beers in the fridge and daily food buffets and yoga and dogs and hammocks in the office. But ultimately the successful organisations are very much centred around data and customer information, and also the relentless pursuit of pleasing customers as well. So leaders need to be looking at ways to certainly incentivise and reward innovation. So that might come from incentives around revenue from new products, but even at quite a basic level, rewarding people for failure and having a go as well, not just doing what they've always been doing. Uh, looking to build your innovation team, or your sort of startup team, is a little bit different to how you would normally build a team. But potentially, as more organisations go to an agile, or more of an agile operating environment, these elements could become more normal. So um, you know in this sort of sense, you're wanting to get special generalists, not specialists. It's important to get volunteers. You want people that are actually interested in being involved in this, and they're not just doing it because. But look, it's important to have people from a different, from different functions. So don't just have a whole heap of engineers or a whole heap of salespeople together, because you're never going to get the the diversity of thought, or the diverse sort of range of skill sets there. Interestingly, at the moment, with the remote working, obviously there is an ability to work flexibly and be more sort of focused on output, or delivery, as opposed to just the amount of time put in. So in this sort of environment, to allow people to work any hours of the day that they want, and allow it to sort of suit them to be able to think and act creatively as possible. So, and I think it's important to remember that if you just transfer an existing team or group of people, onto a project, they're just going to build something that is marginally better than what they were doing before, and they're not going to create, sort of something disruptive. Innovation is based on, understanding and accepting risk and failure. So obviously you need to be conscious of how executives and even the board perceive risk. And you as a HR person, you need to understand how you can reduce and also minimize their exposure to risk. So the riskier strategy is to build and invest in something, obviously, that hasn't been tested, that you haven't experimented, and you've just built the one final product. So as a way of sort of talking about the risk mitigation measures with with the exec or with the board, that is the clear and most straightforward way of doing that, and also cost as well. So the cheaper you can do it, the more basic those initial sort of designs or those initial sort of products and services can be, then there's not going to be too much of a perceived risk there from from the board or from the executive. Now, just sort of finally, as we sort of come to the end of the sort of the workshop, these are a number of tips that you can use to start on your journey. Understanding your customer, understand what potentially in your HR function at the moment, what is the minimal viable HR service that your organisation needs. Run some workshops with your customers internally, but understand, well, what is it that HR primarily needs to deliver, and only then, once you've got that and you've got that basic structure, do you then look at adding sort of value-add services or more sort of optimal sort of functional levels. Always review customer touch points with HR, look at where it is now and evaluate potentially how they could be improved or even removed or replaced with something else or nothing. Standing still and just maintaining is never going to get you anywhere, and it certainly isn't going to help your organisation as it shifts into this sort of dynamic and rapidly changing environment. Technology is often seen as the answer, and I won't name names, but obviously global ERPs will always be the great white hope effectively, and they'll spread essentially a panacea that will solve all issues that are currently being experienced. 99 times out of 100, it just exposes more issues or existing issues within the organisation. So a new piece of technology or a new bit of software isn't always the answer, but more often than not, that technology will shine the spotlight on even further on where those issues are. Here we have a quick innovation checklist that I would encourage you to go through, and also a range of sort of source material here. Now, look, I use and refer to each of these reasonably regularly, and obviously there's lots of tools and tips which you can find in here, which will be helpful in your context, and may potentially inspire you onto things outside of your current role at the moment, and you may use them to look at those inventions, or those the ideas that you've had in the past come to you while you've been lazing on the banana lounge by the pool or something like that. And look, these are really ways for you to actually properly explore them and dig into them a little bit deeper. Thank you for listening and for watching. I hope this has been a helpful little online workshop for you. I'm very much focused on obviously improving I'm improving work through the improvement of HR. So I want to make work better through better HR people and obviously better HR. So my my mission, and I guess a lot of the work that I do is centered around that. I've recently created the Better HR podcast as well, so I'm speaking with professionals from within the industry and also outside of the industry as well on elements that we as HR people can be looking at and doing better. If you would like to engage or connect with me in any way, all my contacts and particulars are there. So again, thanks very much for your time, and I hope this has been useful for you. Until next time, thanks.